Hey, my name is Adam Michael Anthony Simpson, and you're watching my YouTube channel, Adam M.A. Simpson. Today's interview features Koji Ozawa. Koji is a PhD candidate in the Anthropology Department at Stanford, and his dissertation is titled Connected Through Confinement and Archaeology of the Gila River Incarceration Camp. Now, this interview is very relevant to the time, particularly with the situation at the border with Mexico and migrants trying to gain asylum by entering the United States. Now, I just want to make it clear to you that this is not a political recording. This is not a political episode. This is mostly looking at the humanity and our nation's history of treating people from outside as other through the physical space of a internment camp. Just watch the episode. You'll understand, and I hope this leads you into recognizing that things that happen are not unique. And also, Koji is a co-instructor for the Undocumented Migration Project exhibition. Please check this out. It's in the description box below. It's very interesting and very cool work being done on that front. And please support by visiting an exhibition near you if you're in an area that a particular exhibition will be. Without further ado, please watch this episode featuring Koji Ozawa. Hey Koji, thank you so much for being a part of my YouTube channel. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, Adam. Thank you so much for having me. My name's Koji Lau-Ozawa, and I am a fifth year, going on sixth year, I guess, in the PhD program here at Stanford in the Department of Anthropology. And I focus on the archaeology of Japanese diaspora and Japanese American Incarceration Camps.
Oh, great. And so please tell us your story. How did you become interested in and how did you arrive at your research enterprise in anthropology, and more specifically looking at Japanese American incarceration camps?
Sorry, I'm choking on my coffee this morning.
It's all good. That happened to me in the interview I just recorded, so it's all good.
So I was interested in anthropology and archaeology from a relatively early age, from sort of high school years. I was sort of interested in history, in cultures, and in being outdoors. I like going outside a lot. And archaeology, in my mind, sort of blended all of these things. And so I volunteered on a historical archaeology dig that was actually the dissertation project of a Stanford PhD student when I was in high school. And she was working on migrant Mexican section houses in Southern California.
Wow.
And so that had sort of opened my eyes to archaeology not being about pyramids and Greek ruins and sort of what we classically think of, but that having a place in sort of more recent history and to look at these complex stories, especially of communities that often get excluded from the historical record. So I went on in my undergraduate to major in archaeology at the University of Edinburgh. I went from San Francisco. I'm from San Francisco originally, to Scotland, the University of Edinburgh. Came back, worked for a few years. I applied for graduate school a couple of times and didn't get in, and was sort of unfocused. And around that time, my father had passed away, and so I was sort of really trying to figure out, what do I want to do with my life, and a lot of these types of decisions. And then I had an opportunity to do a master's at San Francisco State And so I was working for Stanford's planning department, doing sort of commercial archaeology on Stanford lands. And they had a program where they offered tuition assistance to pursue a master's. So I did a master's part-time. And that was the first time that somebody suggested to me that I do archaeology of Japanese American Incarceration Camps. And I hadn't really even thought about that as being a viable option. And it was a topic that I was interested in. I'd always been sort of interested in because as a Japanese American, it was something that was sort of referenced obliquely in my family. My grandparents would talk about going to camp. And I never really understood what that meant.
What they were talking about.
Exactly. And so they didn't like to talk about it much. My grandfather almost never talked about it. My grandmother would sometimes reference it. And they had a photo album that said Gila on it. And there were all these pictures of them in the desert in front of these barracks, these large buildings in the middle of cactus groves. And I never really understood what that was until I had the opportunity to start looking into the history. And really it sort of managed to take my professional curiosities in archaeology and merge it with a sort of personal story of understanding what my family went through for during World War II with the incarceration. And that's really what drove me towards that topic. And then I continued it into my dissertation here at Stanford. And it was also something that was really important to me to pursue, not just personally as a part of history, but also my family's really valued education. My grandfather came here to the United States from Japan on a student visa, and he studied and studied, but because of the immigration laws in the US, he wasn't able to naturalize. He almost got deported multiple times throughout the 20s and 30s. And even pursuing an undergraduate degree, he worked as a gardener. He was never able to sort of break out of a working class gardening job. And, he loved gardening, but I think he had sort of different aspirations. And they were really blocked. My grandmother, similarly, a voracious reader. But because of the circumstances, and especially because of incarceration, she was also never really able to move past jobs like laundry or helping my grandfather with the gardening business. And then my dad, growing up, started college at Berkeley, but had to drop out when my oldest sister was born to support family. And so there was a real big drive to education, but a lot of roadblocks they kept hitting. And so that really sort of inspired me to try to take up the mission they had sort of started in a way, and pursue higher education at the PhD level.
And succeeding.
I hope so.
Great. I love this story. I remember hearing this because we're both DARE fellows. I love to identify DARE in the interviews. So I remember listening to your story in our weekly sessions. So what drives you to work? Well, you've already kind of answered this, but how has your family background given you passion for these activities, even like further?
Yeah, so I love the DARE shout out. DARE is just such a great program. So my family's experience with incarceration, it's funny, after I started this research, what's become apparent is that every family story is unique, but then at the same time, shares all these commonalities. And there was such silence around it growing up that we don't really have a sense of it until you start talking to other families. You hear questions, what camp were you in? And you sort of realize that 120,000 people were incarcerated during World War II who were Japanese American. And there are 120,000 stories about this that often aren't talked about, that are repressed, that there's deep trauma in and intergenerational trauma. And scaling up, Japanese American incarceration is sort of one event in a litany of immigration and racist policies that have impacted hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in the United States. And those stories often get reduced to single narratives.
Exactly.
And so that's really inspired me and driven me to try to pursue this history and the connections with other parts of American history to really understand the impact on people's lives, and hopefully to change how we perceive it and the policies that lead to these types of events.
Yeah, definitely. This history of treating outsiders is not new, because it obviously was the same for African American people because of slavery, but also like the treatment of Irish people coming in, the treatment of Italian people coming into the country as well. And then, of course, in World War II, Japanese people, and the list goes on. And in later sections of this interview, we're going to be talking about the border with Mexico and treatment of people coming from Central and South America into the country, which is so relevant to the time. Thank you for watching this interview featuring Koji Ozawa. This is part 1 of the episode, so please stay tuned to watch part 2 coming up shortly.